Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks so much for joining today. We're just going to wait for a couple more minutes to let people finish signing up and logging in and joining. In the meantime, if you have any questions that you came with, feel free to enter them into the chat or the Q&A, or just feel free to drop by and say hi. Let us know where you're watching from, and we'll get started shortly. Hi everybody, welcome to our first Gremlin office hours session of the year, how to show your reliability progress. Some quick notes before we get started. This is an interactive webinar. We want to hear from you as much as you hear from us. So please feel free to enter any questions you have in the Q&A or the chat panel, or you can just hang out and chat and feel free to say hi and let us know where you're watching from. This webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available afterwards. So if you'd like to watch it later, send it to a friend, you can do so. And if this is your first time at office hours, first of all, welcome. Glad to have you here. This is a monthly series. We'll be doing this in a very similar style every single month. And if you're interested in looking to see what we have coming up, just head over to gremlin.com/office hours and you'll be able to see our full list there. And also, if this is your first time joining, my name is Andre Newman. I'm a senior reliability specialist here at Gremlin. I'm here to answer your questions and let you know about the product and how it works. So again, don't be shy. Feel free to enter the questions into the Q&A or chat. So just a quick look at our agenda for today. Today, we're going to be focusing really heavily on the reports that are built into Gremlin, but I'm also going to be showing you a new feature that we just launched recently, or rather a set of new features called What Ran, Now Running, and What's Scheduled. I'll show you how those work, how you can use them. I'll do a quick demo showing you how this all looks in the product. And then again, we'll end with Q&A where you can ask any questions. And if you want to see anything specific, I can go back and show you what that looks like in the product. All right, so jumping right into it. So Gremlin comes with 3 reports built in. The team risk report, the team score report, and the company's summary report. Basically, just to give you a quick overview of them, the team risk report shows all of the detected risks for your Gremlin team, grouped by service. If you're not familiar with detected risks, these are risks that we essentially detect automatically in your environment based off of your environment's configuration. So things like Kubernetes pods that can't be scheduled, or images that are trying to be pulled and can't be pulled. We could detect things like that automatically and show them as detected risks, and the team risk report summarizes all of that for you. I'll show you what these all look like later. Next is the team score report. This shows your team's reliability score and test results for each server. So tests are, reliability tests that you run actively. They stress out a specific component of your service, and depending on whether your service passes or fails, we mark that test as passed or failed, and the team score report summarizes that for you. Last but not least is the company's summary report. And this is your sort of 30,000-foot view of your entire Gremlin company, including reliability scores, detected risks, single points of failure, and each of the teams in your organization too. And just a quick note, all of these reports are visible on the web application, but they can be exported as PDFs. So next to the report name in the web app, you'll see that export button. You can just click on that and you'll get a full breakdown of everything just in a very easily file that you can email or print out. All right, so let's start with the team risk report. This one's pretty straightforward. It just shows each detected risk that Gremlin is looking for across all of your services and whether your services are vulnerable to it. Again, detected risks are those configuration issues in your environment that are likely to impact reliability. They don't need any additional setup. They just use information that's already available to the Gremlin agent. And what this is really useful for are things like quickly scanning for open risks across your team. Oops, sorry. Also useful for looking for commonalities that might be common to your services. So for example, if your team hasn't put liveness probes in your Kubernetes pods, this is a really quick, easy way to identify that as a possible risk and an area that your team might want to work on to help improve. And then, of course, we show the risks over time, not just at the current moment. So while you can see at the top that we have 7 open risks, you can see that in the past, we actually had more. So we've been making improvements, right? We've added our services in early October. We had sort of that drop down to 0. It kind of crept back up after that, and now we're taking it back down. So we can see the progress that we're making on these risks over time using this report too. So it's useful for not just seeing what's happening in the present, but also seeing what happened in the past and making sure we're on the right track. So for day-to-day usage of Gremlin, the team score report is the one that you'll probably be looking at the most often. And this report tracks the test results for each of your services, as well as the number of unresolved detected risks. So we also summarize this score so you can see how your team is performing overall. So one thing you'll notice at the very top of that chart there, the reliability score chart has discrete bands. And the reason for that is this is our guidance on what counts as good, okay, and bad. So good being a score of 70% or higher, okay being anything between 70 and 50%, and bad being anything below 50%. So we know everybody's definition of good will be different. This isn't meant to be a set in stone um, um, measuring stick for you to compare against. It's just a quick visual cue to show you in general how you're doing. But there are also a few other things that this report is good for. So with this, it makes it really easy to find non-compliant services. So for example, if you have a mandate that says that your services must be 80% reliable to deploy to production, this is a really good, quick, easy way to go in and make sure that all your services are hitting that, that minimum baseline. And for those that don't, being able to identify them as non-compliant. This also goes for services that haven't been tested recently or haven't been fully tested. Sometimes you can infer that a service needs testing just by looking at its score in the service list, but it's not always that obvious. It's like, for example, here, I have this ledger writer service that hasn't had a memory test done in over a week, yet it has the second highest score. You won't be able to tell that just by looking at its point in time score. But by seeing it here, we're able to see that, I haven't ran that test in a while, so I should go back and make sure that's taken care of. And then, of course, there's looking for trends in your score. So in this case, my score is kind of bounced up and down a little bit before settling around 80%, which isn't bad, but I could definitely do better. But one really good thing about this report is that it's not just the score, but also the score broken down by category. So in this case, I see that my dependencies are kind of on the lower side. So if I go back and focus on my dependency testing and make my dependencies more reliable, I can very easily boost this score back up. And also, just as a general overview, like if you want to identify specific services that are falling behind and dragging your score down, this is another good way of doing that. So for example, in the very middle, I have this Gremlin CPU group that was a test environment on AWS. Obviously haven't touched it in a while, haven't ran any tests on it, and it's pulling the score back down. So this tells me that, if I'm going to keep the system running, I really need to go back and make sure those tests are up to date and recent so I can get my score back up. Again, last but not least, we'll take a look at the company summary report. Like I mentioned before, this is sort of your high level 30,000 foot view of your Gremlin company and everything that your Gremlin, or everything that you and your team are doing in Gremlin. Everything you need to know is here at a glance, your reliability score averaged across all of the teams, the number of risks that you're susceptible to, and of course, you get that breakdown of services by team and by individual service. So one thing that not a lot of people know about is the filter box at the top of the report. So Gremlin lets you add custom tags when you deploy an agent. This is usually to help identify or categorize services. So for example, you might have a tag that's called application, and the value might be the name of an application that a service is part of. You can actually use these filters in this report to filter it to specific services. So that way, if you don't want to see the entire company all at once, but you want to see a subset of services across a bunch of different teams, this is a really good way to do that. So as an example, by default, we have a tag that's called environment, or rather it's named environment. And if you have a service running in production, you can add production to that environment tag. So that would just hint that the service is running in production. And by default, if you click on that filter by box, you'll see that environment equals production tag in there. So that's another really good way to just quickly filter the support down to environment or application or whatever you might prefer for your own needs. So where are some good places to use this report? Of course, as a roll up to management, if you ever get the question, how's your reliability work been going? Here's your answer, right? You can take this report, filter it to your specific team or your specific environment, export it to a fancy PDF if you like, and mail it over. We just try to make it really quick, really easy, and have this information really accessible. And also, another approach you can take is kind of an incentive for friendly competition. So let's say you have that minimum reliability threshold that you want your teams to follow of 80% or 70% or whatever it might be. Create a little internal challenge to see which team can get there first and use this report as sort of a leaderboard. And then, of course, proving compliant. So if your company has that requirement of these services must meet this minimum reliability percentage, instead of looking at each service individually, just look at the entire thing. See how your entire company, your entire environment, your entire architecture is doing as a whole. This screen makes it very easy to look at that and to figure out from there, which teams might be falling behind, which services might be pulling the score down. And it just gives you a really good entry point to making some actual good improvements from there. All right, that was a quick run through of reports. Now I kind of want to switch topics a little bit and looking at some new views that we recently added in Gremlin called Now Running, What's Scheduled, and What Ran. These views let you see every activity that's being done in your Gremlin team, reliability tests, experiments, scenarios, and failure flags, and when they're scheduled to run or if they have run in the past. So while the reports are always historical, these screens are a bit more current and a bit more useful for day-to-day work. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So the most basic one is Now Running. This shows you everything happening in your Gremlin team right at this moment. Which tests you or your teammates are running, what services they're impacting, how and when each test was started, and also it gives you the opportunity to stop tests right there. So for example, if you look at that first test on the production API server, on the very far right, you have that big red halt button. If you're a long-term Gremlin user, that probably looks very familiar. That works the exact same way as it did before. In case you're running a test and something goes wrong, or you want to stop it, or you need a really quick way to just pause that test and prevent it from continuing, just come here and you have that halt button right there. So this page is pretty straightforward, not a whole lot to add here, but very useful and very powerful to being able to manage your team in real time. What's scheduled is an overview of your next week of testing. So like in Now Running, you can see the systems being impacted, the name of the activity, how it was initiated, and when it's going to start. You might notice that the start time column says estimated to start, and this is because schedules are configured to run using time windows. So for example, when scheduling tests to run on a service, you can say, I want these tests to run every Wednesday between 10 and 12 a.m. Gremlin will do some internal math to figure out which test is going to run based off of how long each previous test runs. And so it would give you that estimate based off of that. The actual runtime might vary slightly, but generally they're pretty accurate estimates. And so again, this just shows you your scheduled reliability tests organized by service, your scheduled experiments and scenarios, regardless of whether they're just runoff or recurring. And you'll be able to see all of that just from this screen. And last but not least, what ran is your sort of recap screen, right? This is your Friday afternoon, end of week, what did I get accomplished this week screen, showing you everything that you ran over the past week. This is useful for getting a quick look at the reliability work that you've done, but it's also useful for finding tests that failed or tests that couldn't run and being able to dig into the root cause from there. So like the other screens, you can click into the test or experiment, the service, the results page, and the schedule, and be able to see how the test was initiated, who started it, when they started it, and what the outcome was. All right, that was a lot to cover in one go, but now I'm going to switch over to a demo so you can see what that looks like, what this looks like in practice. I'll also scale up the screen a little bit so it's a bit easier to see. Hopefully that's visible. All right, so I'm logged into my Gremlin account right now. This is just the main login screen that you normally see. On the left-hand side, of course, you will see the reports that I have, company summary, team risk, and team score. I'll start off with the company summary one, just to give you that, again, that 30,000 foot view. And again, my company isn't doing too hot right now. Our reliability score is kind of low, but I do have access to the score across the entire company, and of course, the risks that were detected across the entire company. Like I mentioned earlier, you can group by team. So if you're looking at a specific team, you can just go here and uh, see how they all compare. You also have the filter by box with those tags that I mentioned earlier. So if I only want to see services that are running in production, I can just click environment production and it'll immediately filter it out for me. Again, not too great. Don't pay too much attention to these scores. This is just a demo environment, but this just goes to show you that you can use those to, to fine tune this report to the way you want. And of course, you can sort by the score, either ascending or descending. And for each team or for each service, you're able to see your single points of failure, how many risks were detected, the total number of services, and the score over time. So again, that very good, just high level overview report of everything that's going on in your Gremlin organization. You can filter it and search and do whatever you like to get the information that you need. So next, I'm going to kind of bring the scope in a little bit and look at the team score report. And again, this is the report that's specific to your team. And it's the one that you're probably going to be looking at the most often. So for me, I'm in this product testing team. This is the one that I work in all the time. You can see my team is actually doing pretty good. I've got an average reliability score of 81%. Again, I can see the categories that each score falls under. Everything is looking pretty decent except for dependencies, which is kind of low. So that's telling me that I need to go back and double check my dependency test to make sure that they're passing. And if not, I need to go and figure out why. But the really useful part of this report is if you scroll down, you're able to see all of the services in your Gremlin team, the corresponding tests, and whether the test passed, failed, hasn't been run, or expired. So in this case, you see most of my tests have passed, except for the Gremlin CPU group. This is because these tests have expired. I haven't ran them recently, so I need to go back in and make sure that they're still up to date. But I can also see that there are some tests that I haven't run. So for example, this zone test, I need to really go back in and make sure that I'm running those on all my services. And you also see that I have this very embarrassing set of just red X's across all of my dependency tests. This actually just happened recently, so it's kind of cool that it's happening just in time for this presentation, because it shows you just how useful this report can be, right? So all of my dependency tests are failing except for a handful. I should really go back in and look at each of my services and see, why is this test failing? What can I do to prevent that and fix that? And how do I get this score boosted up? So again, just a really quick, accessible, high-level view into your services and how they're performing. And then last, for the reporting side, this is just the team risk report. I should have mentioned this last time, but for each of the team reports, you are able to select the teams from a dropdown. So if you're a member of multiple teams like I am, you can come in here and just select the team that you want to look at, but I'll keep it selected at product testing. Like before, this shows you your total detected risks over time. See, I had a few more before dropping it down to the 7 that I have right now. So there's some improvement going on there. And then if you scroll down further, you're able to see how the detected risks map to each of your services. So for each of my services, I'm able to see how many risks it's susceptible to out of the total number that are relevant to it. And for each of the risks that are relevant to it, whether my service is susceptible to it or not. So I can see this service isn't AZ redundant and it doesn't have a Kubernetes liveness probe defined. So I should go back in and define that. Now for services that aren't impacted by this detected risk, so for example, if I'm running a service that isn't a Kubernetes service, you'll just see this NA here. That just means that the risk doesn't apply to the service and therefore won't count towards the score. So we won't penalize you for, not adding a liveness probe to a non-Kubernetes service as an example. Gremlin is actually smart enough to figure out whether or not it applies and to pull it out of the score automatically. All right, and so switching over to the now running screen, again, like I mentioned, this is your interface to everything that's happening in your Gremlin team right now. So right now my team is pretty quiet, but let's change that by, let's say, just going in and running a quick reliability test. I'll go to, let's say, my ledger service and then start up a CPU scalability test. So we'll see that's starting to run. You see immediately that now has an icon next to it that shows that there is one activity running on my team. And if I go into it, I can see that I have the CPU test on the LedgerDB that was started by me just a few seconds ago. And if I change my mind and want to stop this, I can just come here and click halt, and that will just immediately stop the test, like halt always does. And so the same thing goes for scenarios, experiments, and failure flags too. If any of those start running by anybody on my team, I can just come in here and see what's going on and stop it if necessary. And for the future look that I mentioned before, that's what what's scheduled is for. This shows you everything that's happening in your Gremlin team over the next week, whether it was scheduled automatically or scheduled by one of your teammates. So in this case, I can see each of the reliability tests that I have scheduled for my service, when it's expected to run, and how it was initiated, and also when it is estimated to start. Same thing goes for scenarios and experiments as well. I can come in here and see what's going to be going on in my team, what services are going to be impacted, and if I need to change my schedule or prevent something from being scheduled, I can very easily just come in here, click on the source, and be able to check, what this schedule is set for and tweak it if I need to. So again, just a very good way, like a Monday morning, if you come in and you want to see what's going to be happening for testing over the coming week, this is a really good view to come to. And then lastly, of course, is what ran. And again, because a whole bunch of my tests failed, the screen is a little embarrassing right now, but I'll just show you how it works in practice. This is everything that's happened in your Gremlin team over the past week. So if what's scheduled is your Monday morning view, this is your Friday afternoon view, right? This shows you everything that you've done, the outcomes of the tests that you've ran, and how the test was run and who ran them. It's like for my reliability test, I can see that I have a bunch of failed, I have a bunch of failed dependency tests. I tried running a few of them manually. Gremlin attempted to run the test, but wasn't able to. If I want to see why exactly, I can always just click on the result, and it will bring me right to the result of the last test. And from here, I can see, okay, this task was client aborted, and I can click into my experiment details and get logs on why it was aborted and so on and so forth. We just try to make this information really accessible to you so you can just get in and quickly see what went wrong and what impacted your reliability score, or rather, what impacted the test results. The same goes for scenarios and experiments too. And one thing I will mention on scenarios while we're here is for reliability tests, Gremlin will tell you whether you've passed, failed, or was unable to run the test. But for scenarios, it works a little bit differently, right? Because scenarios don't necessarily have health checks attached to them, it's not always obvious whether your service passed or failed the scenario after you run it. So by default, the result will show up as unsure here. But if you click on that and you scroll down, Gremlin has this results panel where you can tell it, did your systems perform as expected? So if you ran this scenario and your system stayed online and were responsive, you can click yes, my system did pass, and click save, and then it will show as passed on that review screen. Otherwise, you can click no, my system failed, it fell down, or it became unresponsive, or whatever it might be. And then when you save that, again, you'll go back to what ran, and you'll be able to see that the test failed, just reflecting the manual changes that you made. So for things like that, this is another good place to come in and make those edits as well if you want to. All right, and that was your quick crash course into all of Gremlin's different reporting tools. So right now, I'm just going to wrap up with one more slide. And in the meantime, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A panel. So again, while we wait for questions to roll in, just a few final thoughts. These features are new, but they're available to all users as of last week. So first of all, happy 2025. Here's your belated Christmas gift from Gremlin. If you want to give these a try, just log into your account. You'll see them on the left-hand navigation bar at the top, just below the Gremlin logo, like you just saw in that live demo. And again, if you found this session, if you found this session useful, we'd love to see you in one of our upcoming ones. Again, we run these every single month. We address a different topic every time. We show a different demo every time and look at a different feature of Gremlin. All of our upcoming scheduled sessions and topics are posted to gremlin.com/office hours. All of them will be free, and also all of our recordings are posted there as well. So if there's something that you're interested in learning about that maybe we've done in the past, you can just go there and find the recording there as well. And yeah, in the meantime, I'll wait for questions to roll in. Okay, here's one question. It's kind of unrelated, but I'll look at it anyways. Do not have a cloud config download button and configuration settings for my team. I'm thinking what that refers to probably is the, let's see, when you're deploying an agent, there's a button that you can use to download your client configuration file. And this is to essentially give you a file that helps the agent authenticate with Gremlin so you can onboard a new host or Kubernetes cluster, whatever it might be. There might be specific permissions that you need in order to generate and download this file. So if you don't have that, I would say check with your Gremlin administrator or your team manager. Ask them if they're able to give you access to that, or at the very least, just give you a copy of that configuration file so you can use it. Not a whole lot that we can do on our end from that point, unfortunately, but I would definitely say ask your Gremlin admin. I had another question of which computations go into calculating the reliability score, the number of tests that were run over passed and fail, and are the scores reported by monthly or after each run? Really good question. And I'm not going to tell you to just go look at our docs, but I will pull up our docs because it is defined there. Essentially, the way it's calculated is, so all of the scores are broken down into categories. So we have redundancy, scalability, dependencies, and any others. These can be custom scores that you add yourself. Each reliability, or rather, each test returns its own score of 0 to 100. And the amount depends on whether the test passed, failed, expired, or hasn't been run yet. So of course, tests that haven't been run will give you 0. Tests that pass will give you 100. And if you ran a test and it passed, but you haven't ran it in over a week, it'll give you 75. And the thought behind that is, we give you credit for running a test and for passing it, but services change frequently. Like they're constantly being redeployed. They might be scaling up and down. Developers are pushing new changes to it and so on. So it's just a way to encourage you to keep running these tests so that you're continuously checking your reliability. So immediately after you run a test, the result and the score that it gets back gets factored into the score. So you'll see the score update automatically. So yeah, essentially, when you run the test, you get the score for that test. It gets averaged for the category that that test is in, and then those categories get averaged into the total score. One other thing I will mention actually is this is going into a bit of another topic entirely, but in Gremlin, we have a concept of test suites. So for example, if I go into my services and let's say I just pick the front end service, all of the tests here can be changed. These are what we call a test suite. And it's essentially just a set of tests that you can run on any service in your environment, regardless of what it is or where it's running. So like CPU is its own test, memory is its own test, and so on. We give you the ability to change and edit test suites. So if you have the right permissions, you can go to test suites. Here we have a whole bunch of them that we just made up for internal testing. But the one I'm using right now is just the default Gremlin recommended tests. This is technically where your score gets calculated and saved for all your services. So when you switch to a new test suite, the tests in that suite get applied to all of your services, but it also has its own score attached to it. So if I wanted to, let's say, switch from the Gremlin recommended test to the well-architected cloud tests, I would go in and assign it to my team, but then all of my scores would get set back to 0. That doesn't mean they got deleted. That just means that they got set back to 0 because I'm using a brand new test suite. If I were to go back to my old test suite afterwards, my old scores would get restored because they're attached to the test suite. But essentially, the idea behind that is, each test suite can have a totally different set of tests that it looks for. So it doesn't really make sense to have one single score that encompasses all of them. Instead, we just make sure that the scores are tied to the suite so that it it's just very obvious that the score, which scores the, sorry, it's obvious which tests are related to which scores, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a very long-winded detour, but I hope that made sense. Let's see, do you have any other questions? Okay. Well, if you do think of something after the webinar ends, you can always feel free to reach out to us at gremlin.com/contact. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's about the webinar or about anything else. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. In the meantime, though, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope this session was useful for you. If you'd like to look at our future sessions, again, just head over to gremlin.com/office hours and feel free to sign up there. Otherwise, great to have you join us today. Happy 2025 and hope to see you again next month. Thanks for joining.